my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now today we're on location. We're in the south of England, just outside Rochester Castle, right next to Rochester Cathedral, in the city of Rochester. We're going to have a great time having a look around the Bailey, and then we're going to climb into that great tower. So stand by, enjoy. The first Norman fortress that was built here was under the orders of William the Conqueror himself after he'd invaded and begun his conquest of England 1066. But it would have been a wooden affair. But on his death, he divided his kingdom between his two sons. Robert gets a bit of Normandy, and then William, who becomes William Rufus, William II, gets England. And that should be fine. But here, where there's a wooden castle, we have his rebellious uncle, who's quite famous when it comes to the Battle of Hastings. We have Bishop Odo. He was the guy who commissioned the Bayeux Tapestry. Well, he's held up inside the castle July 1088. And then William Rufus, he has two siege castles built and surrounds the castle and the city and basically begins to starve them out. But they become diseased, and there are flies plaguing them. So they surrender, and Bishop Odo is exiled, but he dies on the First Crusade in 1097. So that is like the first Norman phase of the Rochester Castle behind me. And I thought I'd sit here and show you just how high up the castle is. Right in front of me is the River Medway. Behind me, that castle high up on the hill. It literally dominates the whole area. And interestingly, in the mid-13th century, the outside of this keep would have been covered in a limestone render, similar to the White Tower at the Tower of London. But after nearly 800 years of weathering, there's no trace of the rendering left. So during the siege with his renegade uncle, Bishop Odo, the castle walls had been damaged, and so had the cathedral. So repairs needed to be made. So William Rufus, William II, he strikes a bargain with the bishop here, Bishop Gundulf. Isn't that a great name? Gundulf. But Gundulf was quite a builder. It's actually recorded at his time. He was quite a builder because he oversaw the construction of the White Tower in the Tower of London, the castle keep there. This is wow. So they want him to repair the walls, build them up in stone. But there's got to be a bargain struck here. You see, 1088, the Hadnam Manor in Buckinghamshire was up for renewal, the contract there, and the monks here had it. It's going to cost them £100 to renew it. That's a lot of money in those days. So the king has said, we'll waive the fee if you'll build the wall for us. And old Gundulf, he thinks, yeah, it'll only cost me about £40 to build the wall. Job done. That'll be, was it, £60 profit? Like that. Well, in fact, the walls cost him £66 to build. But if you look, that's them. That's the walls behind me. Now, he did make a profit because every year Hadnam would get them £40 profit. So as you can see, with Gundulf, he was a clever man. There was profit to be made. So William Rufus, William II, dies. The country is then inherited by his brother Henry I. He has a collaboration with the Archbishop of Canterbury, William de Corbeil. He, in 1127, is going to raise a fortification inside the castle wall here at Rochester to protect the bridge to London. The keep they build, 125 foot tall, is said to be, at the time, the tallest building in Europe. It was remarkable in how slender and how beautiful that it actually was. And here it is, still standing 900 years later. So when we're standing here, this is part of the inner bailey, just about, because this enormous expanse here in the old days was actually divided. There was a wall across here, and this is the inner bailey. But if you look right the way across, you can see the remains of some towers over there. Those are from Edward III's time. The one on the right, you can just about see on the right side there some of the broken stone, which they believe was actually the division, the dividing wall, keeping this the inner bailey for those from the castle and those slightly out there. Now this whole area would have been bustling. There were all kinds of buildings here. There were stables, there were blacksmiths, there were farriers, all of that kind of thing would have been going on. But there's an interesting piece. We're going to turn around and have a look at this wall, because this is one of the original curtain walls, and I've been reading more and more, and it keeps saying about Roman. The Romans were here first. They built the first stone wall. And you start to think to yourself, hang on, the Romans were here. And apparently underneath all of this there are Roman foundations that the medieval built their stone surround on their outer bailey wall. And it kind of blows my mind, because this 11th century battlements here, the crenellation as they call it, it's not like in the films, it's quite wide apart. And if you look, there's a ridge, and you can see where the platform would have been, so that the men would have been able to shoot over the top if they need be. But along this wall, you can see there's a kind of a herringbone effect with the stonework. Now we come across this at Tamworth Castle, and their explanation is quite straightforward. Subsidence. Yeah, subsidence, should I say. So these walls here, well, here they are. They're still standing, aren't they? But there's quite a nice little story just a bit further down. So let's go and have a look. Here we have Henry III's chambers. We've got to use our imagination here. Stone building jutted out. The lower floors was a vaulted ceiling cellar. Imagine it full of wine barrels and the finest victuals for the king. Then you have large square holes there. Those are for the beams that came across to form the floor for upstairs. And two magnificent windows overlooking the River Medway there for the king to have light. This was a luxurious chamber, but there was a problem. There was a chapel built right next to it. Privacy in those days, it was hard to come by. And the king could be sat in his chambers. He may have had what we call a closed closet. He might be sat on the, what we call in England, the loo, when people will just walk straight across, going across his chambers to the chapel next door. And he complained that complete strangers would interrupt his peace as they walked through, basically, his bedroom. Privacy, even for the king, was hard to come by here. So on the eastern side of the bailey here at Rochester Castle used to be the main entrance, but it's all gone. There's no trace left. In fact, this whole section of the wall was removed. Elizabeth I allowed it to be quarried for stone so that they could build a bit of a gunnery fortress overlooking the Medway at Upnor Castle. So big chunks of it missing. But you imagine behind me, say you have the dividing wall. On this side, the townsfolk. You might have some not the best carpenters, you will have different tradesmen, but on the other side you will have the stables for the horses. You'll have your proper artisans, your stonemasons, your carpenters who work within the castle. But the custodian, the man who looked after the castle, he was called the constable of the castle. He'd have had 30 soldiers to look after, crossbowmen, longbowmen, maybe some men-at-arms. They have to have armourers, they have to have cutlers to sharpen their weapons. They have to be fed, they have to be clothed, all the way down to their shoes need to be resoled. So it all takes place in the bailey, over the other side of the wall. Very, very busy. But that makes me realise why Henry III decided to have his king chamber built outside of the keep and a little bit further away from where the people are working. But even then, he couldn't get his privacy. I just love the idea that he sat on the toilet and people are walking past going to the chapel. Privacy, eh? We're lucky nowadays, we can just shut a door and lock it. So where we're standing is a northwest bastion of the castle. This is an important piece because it points towards the bridge. This is where you'd have had your bowmen and later on you'd have had your guns. So this is quite a stronghold. And what we're going to do in a minute is walk to the other end of the castle because there was a weak point and we'll have a little look. So if you see the 11th century battlements over there, those crenellations, they would have been the same all the way round. But we're heading now to the south side of the castle. You wouldn't think it, but there used to be a drawbridge along here that would have gone across the castle ditch to a gatehouse. You can see where it would have been here on this fabulous model, but unfortunately you can't see anything remaining of it. The gatehouse has been completely demolished and there's just a wall now across the whole lot. Right, we're at the southern end of the castle and it's brilliant. You have a round tower on the corner of the Norman keep. Should be a square tower, but at the siege of 1215, King John's army, they undermined this part of the ground and they brought a quarter of the castle crashing down. You can still see the join when they rebuilt it. But on top of that, they built what's called this tower here. This is called the Drum Tower. This is a crossbow tower. You can have 2 or 3 crossbowmen at any of those loops shooting at different angles. But what's impressed me, evidence from earlier on, there was actually a 3rd tier on top of that. So this now completely protects what was a vulnerable part of the castle. And apparently the reason they rebuilt it with a round tower in the corner, it was simply cheaper. So it was in the 14th century that Cassell began its decline. It's really sad, but in February 1381, during the reign of young Richard II, the old bridge, the old Roman bridge across the Medway, actually collapsed. What had happened was there was ice melting and great big blocks of ice kept crashing into the stone pillars and the bridge comes down. Then the same year, 9th of July, peasants revolt. You've got the whole of Kent, the whole of Essex, they're in uproar over taxation, the 3rd poll tax. But inside the castle here was a prisoner, Robert Belling. Now he'd been incarcerated here over serfdom laws. And serfdom had almost died out in Kent. So the peasants, led by Robert Baker, I say peasants, they weren't, they were just the common people, attacked the castle and the constable opens the door to them and Robert Belling is released. Then the peasants can make their way to London. Massive piece of English history. But after that, you then go into Edward III. He realises that this castle, although it's in disrepair, is vital because it commands the bridge, the approaches to the bridge over the Medway. So he builds an extra bastion, or has a bastion built at the far end. After that, it really does start to decline. It's your constables, the people responsible for the castle, selling off bits of roof, joists, timbers, all of these kind of things. Would you fancy buying a door? I've got a spare door there. So the castle is literally declining. Become the Civil War. The Weldon family held it. It was still profitable because you rented out the lands around about. There were orchards, there were little farms in the front of the castle, that kind of thing. But during the Civil War, it was on the side of Parliament. So it was never slighted. It remained intact, still profitable, but unfortunately then there was a fire. We don't know the exact details, but it gutted the centre of the keep. From then on, it really does decline. It is just market gardening, those orchards. Apart from that, it then fades out of history into the ruin that you see to this very day. So in front of the castle you have the fore building, and if you want to get into the castle you've got to come up these steps on a dogleg, which then go up to that door. Well, there was a portcullis that lowered down, up and down in front of that door, but there's a little twist. As you follow the steps around down towards the fore building itself, there's a surprise. So in the old days there was no door there, there was an arch, but above it wasn't a drawbridge, it was removable wooden steps. So if the castle was under siege, there was a problem, they simply withdrew the steps inside, shut the door, lowered the portcullis. That's a 3-metre gap you've got to get across. No battering ram in the world is actually going to get up these steps and into there, because if you do, they'll be dropping boulders on you all the way round. We're in the castle, now let's go and explore. Follow me. So let me explain. We're inside Rochester Keep. The problem is there was a fire and the inside of the keep completely burnt down, and you've got to try and spot what's left of the castle. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a good look around, see what we can find. So we're in the fore building. This is the entrance to the castle, is downstairs. This is the chapel that was upstairs. And there used to be a portcullis here. But the problem with the portcullis is the big winding wheel used to be here. So when the castle was at peace, they removed the wheel, put it to one side, and just left the portcullis up. So it acted as a bit of a windowsill just across there. It's the interesting small pieces. If you look up, there was another floor above us. And then you've got two very ornate, very early medieval windows, which are quite lovely. You really do have to take your time, have a good look around. It's amazing what you'll find. So there's a real fantastic piece in this castle. It's called a spine wall, and it literally divides east to west, separating one side of the castle from the other. The spine wall serves as a backbone, adding strength and stability to the keep. But in the centre of it, there is a column that goes all the way down. It's actually the well shaft, and it doesn't matter what floor you are on in the castle, you have access to the well. Obviously, the higher up you are, the harder it's going to be to haul the buckets all the way up. But this shows if you're at the top, or in the Great Hall just down below, or at the very bottom there, you can actually see that they've rebuilt the well head just to show you what it would have been like during the day. So as part of the spine wall, you have these wonderful series of arches. And as we're looking down from this position here, we're looking down onto what would have been the Great Hall on the second floor. So you've got to imagine, you've got the floor across, and interestingly, those arches weren't open in the day. They were blocked up. First of all, they were blocked up with wooden partitions, and then later with stone. And the stonework went all the way up to the scalloped top of the columns there. Those decorative ledges you can see are called capitals. So if they were walled up, you couldn't just step from one side to the other. What there was a door in the left corner, and you can just about see the remains of the other door in the right-hand corner. And it was because of this that the first siege there with King John, it was extended by days, because the garrison, once the castle had collapsed with the round tower, the garrison simply came over to this side, shut the doors, bolted them, and they could withstand some more, mainly because they had access to the water. Job done. We're on the mural gallery. This is where you can imagine your pipers playing their music, entertaining the guests down below that would have been in the lovely hall. There is the magnificent fireplace there. Would have been a great table. People sat closer to the fire, access to the well. Don't forget the arches there were bricked up. So this must have been quite lovely. What confuses me though is it was a mirror image on the other side. If you look through the archway here, you can actually see the other fireplace. So were there two great halls? Was it as the Archbishop of Canterbury wanted? The king could be here and he could be there. But if you imagine the sizes of their households, I doubt if that ever happened. This is an interesting part of the castle to stand in, because it's like a cross-section of the castle. But you can see that corner was the part of the castle, complete with the tower, that was fetched all the way down in the siege of 1215. And when they rebuilt it, you can see there was a big arch window that must have been overhanging and dangerous when it all collapsed. So instead of demolishing and rebuilding that window, they fitted half of it into the rebuild, keeping it as a bit of decoration, I should imagine. But they installed a smaller window underneath it. It was probably down to cost that they didn't rebuild it. And you'll notice the archways on the windows, they're not that nicely decorated. This nice coloured stone here, that's all the way from Caen in France. They've not used it on the rebuild. And you can see there are what I call put lugs, the big holes for the great big beams that go across. They're missing in that corner, because instead of having those great big cross beams, they used a different technique. They didn't have the put lug. The hardwood floors were supported by a large timber frame that was braced against the walls, often resting on a corbel of stone or a post. In this part of the castle, you can see the floor lines going out, but also you can see how steep the roof was. You can just see the line of the roof going up in that far corner. So there is still evidence, even though this is a ruin, there is still evidence of what used to be here. So in the upper stories here, They were quite luxurious, reserved for the nobility visiting the castle. These have no garderobes up there, so that tells us that these luxurious apartments had closed stools. In other words, the latrine was brought to you, it was private. And this is really great. These upper stories, it's worth the extra effort walking upstairs to go to the king's chambers. So upstairs for me with the nobility. One of the most famous parts of the history to Rochester Castle is the siege, 1215, just part of the First Barons' War. It's when King John laid siege to the castle. Now, what had happened was Archbishop Stephen Langton had been blocked by King John in becoming the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it developed into quite a row. Eventually, the Pope gets involved, and England is put on an interdict, so no funerals can be taken place, no weddings, that kind of thing. And then just after that, John himself is excommunicated. So King John has to allow Stephen Langton to become Archbishop of Canterbury. And then there's a bit of what we call argy-bargy. The castle has to be kept by the royal garrison for so long, and then the church can hold on to it for so long. Because don't forget, this is a collaboration between church and the king. So it can be held with the Archbishop of Canterbury, providing that it's held for the land and it's peaceful. But I tell you what, it's so complicated. But this is then what happens. You've got that signing of the Magna Carta, and then King John afterwards reneges on it. But what happens is there's 100 knights and men-at-arms and bowmen inside the castle. So it's not going to be an easy task laying siege to it. And just behind us is the round tower, which was actually fetched down, because when they undermined it, they didn't just dig a hole. They literally dig a cavern underneath. So they've gone underneath the ditch, which is in that side outside the castle. They've then propped everything up with wooden props, just proper mining. And then they filled it with the lard of 40 pigs that were too fat to eat. As the wooden props burnt away that supported the roof of the cavern that they'd undermined underneath the castle, the tower became unstable and it came crashing down. And it wasn't just the tower that came down, it was almost a quarter of the castle collapses, the castle keep, that is. The garrison inside didn't just stand there going, OMG, we're done. They retreated to the other side of the castle. Remember, I told you about the spine wall. Because of the way the castle was built, you could defend from one half against the other. And that's what they did for days, until eventually they were starved out. You know, it's without a doubt, this castle keep was a labyrinth. It's just a shame that all the wooden parts to the keep are missing. You know, it was ironic that it was less than a year, I think, after the siege at Rochester that King John actually died. And so the repair is left to his son, Henry III. He was a young king, so it was going to take some time. But it was 1232 that we've got evidence that there was lots of construction, stonework going on. Now, if you look across just below the arches and the fireplace, you can see the large square putlug holes. These were for the great wooden beams that spanned across that side of the castle, and then the hardwood floor was set on top of it. Now, above the arches, you can see a single line of smaller putlugs. These were for the joists for the roof. So you can see where the roof actually sloped up. You can see it actually on the right. Now, above that is a double row of what appear to be putlugs, but they're actually not. These are nesting nooks. These are for the pigeons, so that you had a constant supply of pigeon meat and eggs in the castle, and the servants could simply go up onto the roof and walk along and gather the eggs as they were needed. So there was another siege at Rochester Castle, 1264, when the Second Barons' War, when Simon de Montfort, the rebel knight, had gone against the king. So he lays siege, I think it's 18th of April, he burns ships on the Medway, big smoke screen. Meanwhile, Gilbert de Clare, his confederate, come across the other side and they capture the Bailey. Buildings are burnt, people are fighting, and they retreat inside the keep, and then everything stops because it was Sunday. So they have a bit of a truce, and then things carry on. Siege engines are brought, stones are thrown against the castle. They begin to dig underneath again. It's going to be undermined. But this time, on the 26th of April, news arrives that reserves are coming to the castle. It's going to be relieved. And Simon de Montfort simply packs up and has it on his toes. It was a ruse. There were no reinforcements coming. It gets pretty dark as you move down the floors into the lower part of the castle. The windows were smaller down here, obviously, for defence. Can you imagine just how gloomy this place would have been with only these small windows and lamps and candles to light up the space? I'll tell you now, if they were cheap candles, cheap lamp oil, there would have been smoky down here. And down in the basement where the wellhead is located, well, that was all used for storage. There's no fireplace. Light and ventilation only came from small windows set higher up in the walls. The first floor, though, just above the basement, does have fireplaces and latrines. So it's possible this is where the members of the garrison had their quarters, where they ate and where they slept. And these floors were accessible via two separate staircases, one in the southwest corner and one in the northeast side of the castle. So here we are at the very bottom of the castle. You can't get any deeper. Now originally there wasn't a door going there. This was an enclosed room, a locked door just on this side and a chute coming down from the latrines. So anything they put down that chute would be collected in this chamber. Yes, we're in the cesspit. It's where the Gong farmer and his family would come down and they would shovel out the poop into buckets, bring it out, and away it would go, being spread on the land and used as fertilizer. I should imagine there were different chambers here, different parts, so they could close off one part to another to allow it to dry. Otherwise, you're going to have to be trying to shovel that liquid poop. Ugh. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tour of Rochester Castle. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I leave, as ever, written on a piece of paper, two of our Patreon members from down under, Flyer Bowman, and then Christine Anna. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.